interruption to all correspondence had been preceded by that of all verbal communications. After 2 or 3 audiences, the emperor had determined not to see you anymore. We had thenceforth no means of meeting each other, and we hoped not to see you again, but you did not desist from making your appearance as usual. We all fled at your approach. Everyone sought his hiding place, whilst you exultingly continued your rounds about the prison of your victims. Under these circumstances, and at this time, a ship arrived from Europe. You received the dispatches, and come in state to Longwood, surrounded by a numerous staff, demanding to make fresh and private communications to the emperor. From the display thus made and the expressions used, we each of us felt persuaded that they must be of a most agreeable nature. The emperor, whether he thought otherwise, or whether in his opinion the quality of the mediator was not in any way affected by the nature of the communications, refused to receive you. He consented a few days afterwards to see one of your officers upon this subject. But what had he to communicate to him? The most disagreeable things, and couched in the most offensive language. And that, we all exclaimed, was what you had reserved for the emperor in person. And what else could we say, feel, or think? What other feeling could you have entertained in our place? Those dispatches contained, among other things, in order to make us repeat our declarations and sign without reserve the form that would be presented to us. At the time of the first declarations, they had thought to gain something by impressing us with the fear of remaining here forever. This time they knew us better, and we were much more certain to secure us by threatening to make us instantly quit the island. With this alternative accordingly, a form was produced to us which was exceedingly revolting to us in its expressions. In vain did we attempt to resist. The sine qua non vibrated incessantly in our hearts. In case of refusal, we were to be sent direct to the Cape. We were to abandon to himself the dear and sacred object of our hopes and of our cares, and to see him go down alive into the grave. We signed without his knowledge, aware that he would feel hurt were he to know it. He was irritated by so many vexations. We signed in the silence of night whilst he was reposing, and we congratulated ourselves that we had gained this triumph over his personal intentions. It was the triumph of tender children who deceived their father in order to serve him. Our fresh declarations were followed by fresh restrictions, by which you contracted the limits of our first boundary considerably. You also struck out of those limits the space formerly allotted for the emperor's ride, and gave us a motive that he had discontinued using it, adding with much formality that if you should ever feel a desire to renew that exercise, on his expressing the wish, the post would be re-established for the time of his ride. We immediately exclaimed, this again is striking with one hand and justifying oneself with the other, wantonly to ill-treat us here, and artfully to manage to appear in a fair light, at a distance, in the eyes of ministers and of the public, for it was impracticable to replace the post for a ride that was only taken at the caprice of the moment, and you knew us too well to fear that such a thing would ever be asked of you. The remainder of the restrictions contained some points more or less disagreeable applying to each of us, what we thought proper, but what would hardly be credited. And what few will believe is that you should have stated in them that if the emperor happened to meet anyone in his rides, he was not to speak to him beyond what common politeness required. What restrictions? What forms? To whom did you address them? What were our feelings? Those of indignation had been long since exhausted, and we had nothing left for fresh insults except a sort of senseless wondering. But if these restrictions could ever reach Europe, should they become public, and we have been assured that you have kept them here in a sort of mystery, should they be made known to the nations and reach the ears of the sovereigns with whom you have been acquainted, what think you would be their feelings? Be this as it may, we have concealed them within our breast and have taken good care that they should not come to the knowledge of the august personage for whom they were intended, and who is probably still ignorant of them. In the meantime, the number of sentries was increased. The hours at which they encircled us were advanced. Ditches were dug, and palisados placed all around the establishment and the emperor's stables, which are at a short distance, were turned into 2 complete redoubts, which the Chinese and the soldiers who raised them jocularly christened Fort Hudson and Fort Lowe. What has been the result of all this? That the emperor, to whom exercise on horseback had been rendered irksome, who had limited himself to a few walks around the garden and in the wood, meeting at every turn some object calculated to shock him, has now confined himself to his apartment, where you will undoubtedly soon occasion his death. Medical men think that the absolute want of exercise is rapidly hastening his dissolution. They must have told you so, and this certainly is his own opinion. You reply that it is the emperor's own free will, and that you consider yourself absolved from the consequences of the event, but does it not follow that you must have rendered life wholly insupportable to him, if you thus confess that he calls and wishes for death? What a dreadful responsibility. If I were to dwell upon this subject, sir, I might perhaps succeed in convincing you that the dread of the last moments of this great man ought to inspire you with the tenderest cares and the most anxious uneasiness, at least during the time of your own administration. Having briefly detailed the principal circumstances which I have witnessed at Longwood, allow me, sir, to ask you in my turn what can happen the causes and the motives of these severe and rapid aggravations of a situation daily and so cruelly rendered worse. The dignified and important part of your mission, that of watching over the abode of the Emperor Napoleon and the island of St. Helena, is it not the same as when he arrived in this island, as when you yourself arrived? Whence proceed such severe, such harsh, and barbarous changes? Has the danger increased? Have the chances augmented? Have you discovered any plots? Had any correspondence been established? Have you got any clue? Can you point out any facts or justify any suspicions? Certainly not. And if you have no other object in view but to combat every chance possible and that can be foreseen, where would you stop? For death alone can embrace them all. But it is a positive fact that you will surely not deny it, that the first, the only act that has occurred since your arrival in the island is that for which I find myself here at this moment in your hands. You may have thought at first that you were about to make some great discovery. You have witnessed with what ease, with what calmness, I have anticipated your own ideas. I have most readily consented to lay open before you unreservedly my most secret papers, those that contain day after day all my thoughts and actions. They have afforded you an opportunity of satisfying yourself of the truth of the above assertion, that the present is the first, the only affair of this kind, and you are also now satisfied that this circumstance is nothing less than nothing. It is therefore true, or at least we could not but think so, and every impartial man will join us in believing that all your measures have been directed by bitterness, irritation, and personal feelings much more than by the cause of public duty. No person is less disposed than I am to prejudge evil, but I know that men and their decisions are too often influenced by secret impulses which elude their own observation and lie concealed in the folds of their hearts. Descend into your own, search and analyze it. The result will perhaps astonish you. You are constantly saying that in our relations with others we never see but the wrong side of things, and you assure us that your intercourse is more impartial, more candid, and more just. Really, sir, is a man a judge in his own cause? This impartiality, this correctness, sir, is precisely what we are most in doubt of. You have, in this respect, a great advantage over us. It is upon our documents that you make your observations and found your replies. But where are your documents? Where would not be the embarrassment of those who would have to decide between us when we thus appear in open day, whilst you are enveloped in mystery? What means have we of defending ourselves against your errors? This reflection cannot fail to strike you, ministers, some day or others. If they wish to be just, the little we know of your ideas is often captious and deceitful. Your assertions are quite correct in principle, though perfectly inadmissible and null in their application. Thus, for instance, you told me here, saving only the security of the emperor's person and all communication with him, unauthorized by you, you were ready to adopt whatever measures might tend to better our condition. Nothing could be more reasonable, I exclaimed. But we had no sooner entered into details than you showed a disposition to go still further than you had already ventured. Let us now come to what is personal to myself. Your attention was chiefly directed to me, and I was the particular object of your ill will. I deserved it, for though perhaps the most quiet of all by character, I have shown myself the most irritable on occasion. I have been the most ardent. I was proud and sensible of my situation. I dared to express it openly. All that I have done and written is to be ascribed to this feeling, and nothing to malevolence, which is foreign to my nature. It was thus I described and expressed in my letters whatever I saw and whatever I felt, and with the less hesitation as to what concerned you, sir, as I was to send it to you myself. If I had written mysteriously, perhaps I might have been more guarded. These letters displeased and irritated you, and you at last forbade me to write and threatened to remove me from the emperor if I continued. When you found that I had written to Europe for certain articles which I wanted for myself, you came to tell me that some had already been sent from England, which I might use. I had formed a determination that you never should find me personally on the bill of your expenses or as a party to any request. I refused, giving as a reason that it was foreign from my habits to accept anything, so long as I was not entirely destitute of resources. I wished to preserve my feelings quite free and unfettered by gratitude. You sent me words some days afterwards that you would complain to your ministers of my having refused with contempt what they offered me. You found fault with my conversations with those who made their appearance amongst us. I destroyed in their minds the absurd calumnies, the ridiculous stories that had been invented respecting the greatest of characters. I made known to them certain traits with which they were much struck, of which they had until then been perfectly ignorant. You reproached me with zealously propagating what concerned us in order that it might reach Europe. I compared myself to a man who, whilst he is murdered in a lonely field, destitute of assistance, calls upon the passing birds to witness. Was it offending your country or violating its laws to put them in possession of the truth? On the contrary, I was serving England, and entitling myself to its gratitude. Your efforts against us in this respect, your excessive and severe precautions against your own countrymen, could not, we thought, but encourage and justify from our conviction that trusting in your distant situation for obtaining the sanction of your government to your arbitrary acts, you had no longer any other fear than that they should be known to the public. Why else keep us in strict seclusion? Why throw obstacles in the way of our being visited or seen by your countrymen, or of our conversing with them, if there was nothing to conceal from their knowledge? Was it the fear of our making false representations to them? But you should, on the contrary, have allowed them to see everything. And if appearances were not borne out by the facts, they would then have left us and pitied us for thus exaggerating our misfortunes. When the question arose about removing someone from the emperor's person, you declared that your choice should fall upon me if you did not think me useful to him. In short, your insinuations against me and your warnings to me were repeated on every occasion. They were, I confess, a matter of indifference to me. When a martyr has reached a certain point, he no longer calculates his tortures, or rather, perhaps, he's actually pleased with them. I had long since reached that point. In a physical as well as a moral sense, The measure was filled. I was literally speaking, hardly sheltered from the inclemencies of the weather in my apartment. If it rained, I was drenched. If the sun shone, I was suffocated. My son and myself had no other bedroom than a space sufficient for 2 very small beds. Newgate had been a better place, but for the sacred cause that gave vigor to my mind, my body would certainly have yielded long ago. You ought not to have been ignorant of this. If I had persisted in never preferring a complaint to you upon this subject, I did what became me. It was your business to remedy the evil. He is bound to watch over me, said I, for good as well as for evil. The truth is that we appear to have been considered as objects of reprobation for whom anything is too good. And yet, God forbid I should dare to allude here to an august personage so wonderfully restored to his throne by the spontaneous movement of a whole nation, and only torn from it by the blind efforts of other nations and the ostracism of kings fearful for their own existence. It is of those only who surround him that I mean to speak. What could I be reproached with? Who, the victim of 2 mighty revolutions and always in opposition to my interests, have lost my patrimony in defense of a monarch hurled from his throne, and have sacrificed my family, my fortune, my very liberty, to devote my cares to a monarch who had been elevated to one, and that venerable Grand Marshal, the model of devotedness in every virtue. What could he be reproached with? And so on for all the others. No, said I to myself with pride, we are neither culprits, nor even men of an ordinary description. We profess the most sublime, the most noble, the most rarer virtues. We give a noble example to the world. Our memories will be forever engraved on all generous hearts. We are here upholding the honor of those by whom kings are surrounded. After the example which we have set, it will no longer be said that unfortunate monarchs find neither devotedness, fidelity, nor love. Or it must be admitted at least that Napoleon had created those feelings.